Hey everyone, it's Devin of Darkstar Games, and welcome to the first making of video for Crisis of DreamCell. This first video will be the origin story of the game. I will explain how the project was conceived and the growth to its current development. To start off, where did the idea come from? It started off as a capstone project for college, and as a team, we were tasked with creating a remake of an already existing game from scratch. The only stipulation is that everyone working on this had to have played the game at least once. Going through many genres, we decided that horror would be fun to design and help us stand out from the other teams working on their capstone project. After discussing which game to remake, we decided on Dead Space specifically for its atmosphere and gameplay. Since I didn't like the idea of a one-to-one remake, I suggested that we pull away from the remake idea and just use inspiration for our own original IP. Now that we had our genre and our game, we had to choose an engine. During our time in college, we used both Unity and Unreal Engine. And since I'm more familiar with Unreal, I would help my teammates understand the basic fundamentals of Unreal during an earlier programming class. Since then, they have been up for using Unreal for any future projects. Because of Unreal's blueprint scripting, it was easy for us designers to prototype different systems quickly. This early prototype consisted of a testing level to work on the basic mechanics of the game and to get an idea of the aesthetic that we wanted for the final product. One of the first major challenges we faced was scheduling. We had to work in sprints. We would set goals at the start of the week, and by the end of the week, we would have to show if we've completed those goals or not. Because we had a limited amount of time to work on the game, we couldn't get the grander ideas that we had developed properly. We were working with a form of crunch the entire time the game was being developed as a capstone project. Working with this limitation, along with needing a new mechanic for each new level, made them take a big hit with the overall end goal. We didn't have any time to write a proper story or make sure that the levels connected, so we brainstormed ideas for levels and mechanics and tried to connect them later on. Because of this minor inconsistency between levels and mechanics, some ideas were left on the cutting room floor. One of the first ideas was the HUD elements. Originally, there was a minimap as well as health and stamina always on screen. The health bar was cut for a more minimalist design connected to the player, and the stamina would disappear once it was not being used. The minimap had a problem with performance since the game rendered a camera above the player to show the map properly. This was the fastest solution that we had with the crunch of sprints. The minimap wasn't used as often as we'd like, and we eventually just cut and removed it. There was a melee attack implemented since it was part of Dead Space's core combat, but during testing we found that many people wouldn't use it since the enemies would get too much damage on them before they could do any damage back, and no item in the environment required a melee to progress through. A pushing mechanic was introduced and even used in many levels to allow the player to block off paths from enemies and to find hidden areas. This was removed later on in development because enemies would squeeze right out and the physics property didn't feel right to the players. The areas with movable objects have been switched out to an interactable that trigger events to happen. A third weapon was included in the earliest versions, a grenade launcher. Even though it was fun to mess around with it and demolish groups of enemies, it had its problems. It was easy just to blast a grenade into a room and clear out every enemy within it. Because of this problem, balancing, we cut the grenade launcher and decided to swap it out with a different gun for the full game. When programming the enemies, we tested different types that the player would encounter. One of the first ones that we programmed was an enemy that could attack from far distances. We tested it with the basic Unreal Engine 4 mannequin since we didn't have any models available early on. It was removed because of balancing issues. It could kill the player way too fast and it was hard to tell where the enemy would hit the player from. This right here was our first proper enemy with a full model, but since it wasn't animated, it just T-posed around the areas that we put it in. We later found better models that would take its place but kept its logic between the models. Finally, there was this early boss enemy. It had proper animations, but since the logic was not fully fleshed out, the player could get damaged just by touching its arm. We still use this model even now for placeholder boss encounters since they have a similar logic. Even though there were complications early on, we believe that we can make the game the best it could be with time, even with all the crunch this early. After early prototyping, we would step away from Dead Space in favor of the original IP with a different story, and the story would take a drastic change. Instead of being based in a space station like we originally planned, we set it within a research facility with the player fighting to escape to the outside world, showing the effects of the experiments breaking free and escaping to the world to create havoc. This would influence the levels moving forward, pushing towards the version that is being worked on today. In the next making of video, I will explain the work done on the earliest full version up to the demo's first iteration. The demo is currently being worked on, and we can't wait for you all to try it once it's released. Links to the game will be in the description, so check it out and keep an eye out for the demo's trailer and release date. Thank you all for watching, and before we leave, have a sneak peek at the upcoming trailer for Crisis of DreamCell.